Welcome to my world, where every story unfolds.
So what would a second Trump presidency actually mean for U.S. immigration policy? Well, if he returns to the White House, there's a detailed plan all ready to go, designed to completely overhaul the system from day one. We've been digging into the policy documents and reports, and we're going to break down exactly what that plan looks like, the executive orders, the legal tools they'd use, and the potential fallout. Let's get right into it.
Here's the game plan for this explainer. We'll start with the day one vision. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the core policy proposals and, crucially, the mechanics of how they'd actually be enforced. We're also going to look at how the government itself might be reshaped to get all this done, check out a pretty surprising historical parallel, and then wrap things up with what's really at stake.
All right, the first thing you need to get your head around is that this strategy doesn't really depend on Congress passing new laws. Instead, it's all about a rapid-fire series of executive orders, what the National Immigration Law Center actually calls a dizzying slew, all designed to have an immediate, dramatic impact.
And the goal outlined here is, well, it's massive. We're not talking about small adjustments here. We're talking about fundamental changes to how immigration is handled. The idea is to use every bit of executive power to kickstart a huge deportation effort right away, while also shutting down pathways for asylum and other forms of legal entry.
Okay, so what are the actual pillars of this plan? The documents we've looked at really point to three main policies that would be the absolute core of this whole shift.
First up, a mass deportation plan. And the key to unlocking it, according to these sources, would be a national emergency declaration. You see, declaring an emergency could open the door to using some powerful, pretty rarely used wartime laws, things like the Alien Enemies Act or the Insurrection Act, and those could, in turn, be used to get the military involved in immigration enforcement on U.S. soil.
The second big proposal is an attempt to end birthright citizenship with the stroke of a pen, an executive order. This would mean that if a child is born in the U.S. to undocumented parents, they would no longer automatically become a U.S. citizen. Now, this flies directly in the face of how the 14th Amendment has been understood for over 100 years, backed by Supreme Court precedent. And this really brings us to the heart of the legal fight. This quote from the National Immigration Law Center kind of sums up the opposition's view. They frame it not just as a simple policy change, but as an attempt to rewrite the Constitution itself without actually, amending the Constitution. And third, the plan involves bringing back travel bans and possibly making them even broader. An executive order would tell intelligence and security agencies to review which countries have what they call deficient screening. That review could then become the justification for slapping on new, maybe even tougher, country-specific bans on anyone trying to enter the U.S.
So we've talked about the what, the big policies. But what about the how? How would a mass deportation plan actually be carried out on the ground? The sources point to one very specific, very powerful legal tool that would be expanded in a huge way: expedited removal.
So first, let's just be super clear on what this is. Expedited removal is basically a fast-track deportation process. It gives an immigration officer the power to remove someone from the country pronto, without them ever seeing an immigration judge or going through the traditional court system.
Now, this slide here, this shows the night and day difference. For years, expedited removal was pretty limited by geography and time. You basically had to be caught within 100 miles of the border and within 2 weeks of arriving. But the proposed expansion just erases those limits. All of a sudden, this policy could apply to someone picked up in Kansas City, not just a border town in Texas.
And this number right here is what makes the new policy so incredibly broad: 2 years. The proposal totally flips the script on the burden of proof. It would mean any undocumented person, anywhere in the country, who can't prove on the spot that they've been here for more than 2 years could be put into that fast-track deportation process, with no court hearing. Okay, to pull off policies on this scale, you can't just change the rules. You need the people who will enforce them to be on board. And the sources suggest the plan for that involves reshaping the federal workforce itself, using a tool known as Schedule F.
So what on earth is Schedule F? Well, think of it as a way to fundamentally change who works in government. It's a plan to reclassify thousands of jobs, stripping career federal employees of their normal job protections. This would make them at-will employees, meaning they could be fired much more easily, with the stated goal of making sure the bureaucracy is fully aligned with the president's agenda. And if you look at the kinds of jobs that could be reclassified, wow, it's incredibly broad. We're not just talking about a couple of top managers. These criteria could cover tens of thousands of federal workers, lawyers, policy experts, scientists, basically anyone who has a hand in shaping or carrying out policy. This would be a massive change to the civil service as we know it.
Now you might be wondering, has a deportation effort on this kind of scale ever been tried before? Well, yeah. The sources point back to a really controversial immigration crackdown from the Eisenhower administration, way back in the 1950s.
The historical parallel is a 1954 program known by its official and, yes, highly controversial name, Operation Wetback. It was a short, intense campaign that used military-style sweeps and tactics to carry out mass deportations of Mexican immigrants. It's often brought up today as the model for the scale of what's being discussed.
And this timeline here tells a really interesting story. This operation didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was happening at the same time as the Parole program, which was bringing Mexican workers into the U.S. legally. But what you see is this huge concentrated spike in enforcement in 1954, which then just plummets. It shows this wasn't some gradual policy change. It was a short, sharp, aggressive campaign.
And that brings us to this staggering number. In just that one fiscal year, 1954, there were 1.1 million enforcement actions. That includes removals and returns. This number really gives you a sense of the scale that a modern mass deportation plan might be aiming for, and it's the figure everyone points to when they talk about this historical precedent.
So, after looking at the proposed policies, the mechanics, the government changes, and the history, what's actually at stake here? The source materials raise a lot of serious questions about the potential impact this would have on people, on communities, and on the country as a whole.
The risks laid out are pretty significant. With a process like expedited removal, there's a much higher risk of deporting people by mistake. People who might have valid asylum claims, or, as the sources warn, even legal residents or U.S. citizens who just can't produce their documents in that moment. That could lead to a major infringement on civil liberties, creating a sort of show-me-your-papers environment, stoking fear, and raising the risk of racial profiling. And that's not even mentioning the human cost of separating families and the massive disruption to the economy.
And so all of this leaves us with this huge fundamental question, which is really what this entire plan puts on the table. How does a nation balance its goal of aggressive immigration enforcement with its own constitutional principles of due process and equal protection? The answer to that question will really define not just the future of immigration policy, but the country itself.
If your brain's tired from all that knowledge, take a little break and vibe with my songs. Let the music refresh your mind. See you in the next video.